Does anyone else feel like this is all a bunch of bullshit? Does anyone else feel more stupid than they used to, despite the fact that we are swimming in a constant deluge of information every single day? Does anyone else look at the certainty at which we speak of things today, especially online, and think for a second, wait a minute, how can we be so sure of this? How is everyone suddenly an expert on everything? How can they say so confidently that this one thing will make me rich, will make me happy, will make me confident, will make me more beautiful, will make me smart? Are they speaking from life experience, or are they just regurgitating the generally accepted talking points? Are they just saying things that sound good or sound right without having done those things themselves? Where would that life experience even be coming from if they're spending most of their time on the computer at home by themselves? At the same time, how can people in positions of traditionally established authority, like politicians, scientists, educators, speak on things so confidently which are so verifiably incorrect, and be so out of touch with the fact that many people realize what they are saying is in fact incorrect? If you've ever looked at a politician's Twitter posts and read the comment section, you'll know exactly what I mean. These days, I feel in a strange way like I know less than I used to, or at least I'm less sure of things than I was before. So today, I would like to have a chat about why I feel like an idiot these days. Why I'm actually kind of happy about that. And I'm curious to know if you also feel as though we're experiencing somewhat of a changing of the tides, where being stupid is better than being smart. And to preface this video, to add a bit of context around why I wanted to talk about this particular subject today, if you remember at the end of my last video, I talked about this question that's been bothering me for a very, very long time, and it's a question that I want to devote a lot of time to trying to answer now. And that is basically how to lead a good life against the challenges that we find ourselves facing in the modern world. Maybe you feel a different way, and of course this isn't true in all cases, but to me at least, it seems like much of the incentive structures that we have set up in our society today are geared towards targeting the worst parts of ourselves. And in the modern world, we are very, very good at targeting and exploiting those parts. So I personally feel that it is a struggle every single day to work against this. And in that video, I mentioned 3 pillars that I see as integral to this struggle. The first one being what I would call meaning, and that would be the exploration of topics like spirituality, philosophy, ethics, morality, code of conduct, and so on. Another pillar being what I would call vitality, which would be exploring things like how to maintain good mental and physical health, but not just that. It would also be exploring how to cultivate the inner vitality that they speak of so eloquently in Eastern traditions, like chi or prana, or the same force by another name. And as you can probably tell, these pillars aren't mutually exclusive. They support and relate to one another. And lastly, the pillar most relevant to today would be that of independence, which I see as composed of 2 main factors, those being financial independence and mental independence, which will be the focus of today's video. Mental independence I think of as the ability to maintain mental fluidity, or the ability to think critically, hold 2 opposing ideas inside one's head at the same time, or perhaps most importantly, to reflect upon your ideas and admit to yourself when you might be wrong. So as I said, it might be useful to think of mental independence as the overarching theme of today's chat. And it will definitely be useful to remember that I am not an expert in any of the things that I've just listed. And I would be pretty skeptical, of anybody who says that they are. Despite the fact that I've had a regular meditation practice for over a decade now, and I have delved much deeper into it than just plain vanilla mindfulness practices, I would not consider myself an expert on meditation. Despite the fact that I've explored many old texts ranging from the foundational, like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, to the more obscure type of thing like the Gnostic Gospels or pre-17th century alchemical tracts, I would not consider myself an expert on mysticism or esoterica. Despite the fact that I have academic, career, and personal experience in the financial world doing things that most people don't, I find myself regularly changing my mind and my opinions on subjects within that world. As we will talk about in just a moment, I'm an idiot who's less sure of pretty much everything now than I feel like I was before. But there is that one main curiosity that I described earlier related to these 3 pillars that's been with me for as long as I can remember. And so I hope that maybe together can bring you along on this crazy quest. We can uncover an answer or two. So to begin the meat of today's chat, I would like to tell you a story about my very first experience with cannabis. This was a very significant experience for me that would ultimately be quite formative, and that's because it completely shattered my worldview at the time and was a major precursor to developing the mental fluidity that I seek to maintain today. To understand how this was the case, I think I'll need to add a bit of context to this story. Prior to this experience, I had been growing up with a very narrow worldview, probably due at least in part to growing up in a small town with a pretty big lack of diversity of just about anything. As a result, my life was largely oriented around the dominant values and narratives of the place where I grew up, and that was all very traditional, I would say. At this time, I believed that most adults were generally well-developed people with good moral stature and wisdom. I believed that life was relatively fair, benevolent, and that there was a pretty clear and straightforward path that anyone could follow, and if you did, you would wind up happy. And I believed, based on simple logic akin to that used by Richard Dawkins, as well as my experiences in the Catholic Church, that the correct way to view the world from a metaphysical point was, obviously, atheism. In addition to these beliefs I had developed, I also noticed other things developing, and that was what I would call, I guess, traits that seemed to be different in me as opposed to my peers or the traditional norms around me. But I didn't know why. For example, I loved spending time in the forest in my backyard dressed up as an adventurer with a wooden sword strapped at my hip while my friends were out, hitting dirt jumps on their bikes and drinking Monster energy drinks, much cooler things. I loved drawing and writing stories, often inspired by the fantasy books that I was reading at the time, which I definitely read alone because that was the type of genre that was like the ultimate bully attractant at the school I went to. And I also loved a pretty wide array of music, which was definitely more extensive than the narrow band of hardcore hip-hop that was very popular among my peers. Yeah, nothing like some 12-year-olds listening to the 10 Crack Commandments by Biggie Smalls, right? But I didn't know why I liked these things, or if it was wrong to, because it seemed like not really anybody else did. This was all completely shattered the moment I had my first experience with an entheogen. which is a term I prefer to the more derogatory variations, as I think it better encapsulates the nature of this particular botanical group. The reason this had such a profound impact on me is because of the way it shattered so many of my preconceived notions at once, like dominoes falling one after another, while at the same time it deepened my relationship with myself. In fact, I would say that my experience very closely resembles that of Carl Sagan. Yes, the Carl Sagan. Fun fact. He wrote a very cool essay about his experience with cannabis, but interestingly, he wrote it under the pseudonym of Mr. X because he feared what would happen to him if he spoke openly about what was, and I think still very much is, a much maligned plant. So he went basically his entire life without ever speaking publicly about this, which is definitely a shame and something that I can relate to. In my case, the very first domino to fall was my trust in institutional authority. For all my years up until this point, it was hammered into my head that this plant was pure evil. It would rot your brain. The devil himself would be waiting for you in hell. And not only that, but there were people standing by at the ready, equipped with guns, who were being not only encouraged and endorsed to come and seek you out and capture you, but they were being paid to do so, all in the name of good old justice. And then in a single, significant, and expansive moment, I realized just how wrong all of this was, factually and morally. It didn't take me long to wonder, if that's so incorrect, what else could be? And of course, the answer was many, many things. From this moment on, I've continued to try and develop mental fluidity, or mental independence, albeit with many lapses into biased or team-oriented thinking that we fall into so often. But my experience showed me a very important distinction, which I think may help form the basis of mental independence. And that is the distinction between direct knowledge and indirect knowledge. I would classify direct knowledge as knowledge that comes from your own experience or verification of something, whereas indirect knowledge would be something that you've heard from somebody else, or it could be something that you've read in a book or online or watched in a video. I think both of these forms of knowledge can be correct at times and incorrect at times. For example, let's say I've only known one cat for my entire life, and that cat was just a huge asshole. Then I might think that all cats are assholes, which they can definitely be, but they are not all. Or on the other hand, somebody could tell me that all cats are wonderful, which is, of course, also not true. But at the very least, especially when it comes to consuming information online, I find myself growing more and more tired of the indirect forms of knowledge, and I'm curious to know if you feel the same way. For example, I've never made a video about side hustles. I've never had one, and my opinion is in that most instances, they don't make any sense. But I could have made several videos about side hustles, even though I've never done one. And all I would have had to do is just simply hopped onto Google or Reddit, looked at lists of all these different side hustles, compiled and synthesized them together to figure out which ones might sound the best or look the best or seem the most promising, and then just simply list them off in a video. Oh, and then of course slap a nice title on there, something like 10 best side hustles for 2023, and then in brackets put something like $1,000 per day or something else ridiculous like that. You can find thousands of videos like this about any topic you can possibly think of. But whenever I watch them, I'm usually dismayed to find out that the person is rarely speaking from their own genuine experience. Sorry, I had to adjust that back there. The sun was coming in hot. Also, I turned off, I don't know if you can see it, I turned off my air conditioner back there. It's like 27 degrees today. That's why I'm wearing this tank top. You guys don't know what I have to go through to film things like this. My throat is parched. Okay, back to it. So, you know what? That person I was just speaking of earlier, that person's been me a lot of the times. I've made plenty of videos where I've incorporated lots of indirect knowledge in them. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing by itself. For example, I've talked about how early retirement would work from a financial standpoint. And to do that, I've talked about things like the 4% rule and all that kinds of stuff. Obviously, I haven't retired yet, so I can't speak to those things from my own experience. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I still can't present that information. So it's not that indirect information isn't useful. I just think, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is from my opinion today, is that I find myself leaning much more heavily on people who present direct sources of information. I find that much more valuable. For example, as I shared in the last video, I spoke about how I got into the FIRE movement and how I essentially adopted the whole starter pack of that community, which is largely made up of all this indirect knowledge that comes from everybody else in the community, right? But then once I actually started doing the things myself, once I started actually getting my own experiences, I realized that I actually disagree with a whole bunch of things within it. I think this is a very important distinction. And just like with cannabis, I don't think I would have ever arrived at this very important distinction had I not gone and experienced these things myself. And so now I find myself wondering again, what beliefs do I have that are largely made up of just indirect information? One idea actually came to me from reading the comments on my last video, and I just want to thank all of you for leaving comments because it helps make this much more of a conversation as opposed to a one-way thing. And I learn a lot from all of you. Some of you pointed out that the way I was framing the working class problem, as I called it, closely resembles the class struggle pointed out by socialist thinkers or people who talk about late-stage capitalism. Initially, I had a reaction to this that you might expect from 99% of finance bros. When you mention the word socialism, it's like you're conjuring an evil spirit. But then I thought, well, wait a second. Do I actually know enough about this to have such a strong opinion about it? I haven't read Adam Smith, Hayek, Friedman, Keynes, certainly not Karl Marx or Hegel. Where is my opinion on this coming from? It's coming from everybody else. I could tell you that capitalism is revolutionary because it has provided private property rights. It has allowed for us private individuals to control the means of production. It has also allowed us individuals to be the ones who allocate capital for investment. I could also tell you that the rise in living standards that we've seen over the past couple hundred years or so has been largely because of capitalism. I could tell you that most of the richest countries in the world are capitalist, and every major socialist experiment has failed. And I could tell you that Karl Marx is a bad, bad man. And if any of you like his ideas, then you are a bad, dirty person and you smell terrible. Everything I've just said could be 100% right. And to me, right now, a lot of that sounds pretty right. Except for the last part, which was obviously a joke. You might smell great. But the point is, I don't actually know. I haven't confirmed this stuff for myself extensively. And while I'm not too concerned about the way you smell, I am pretty concerned about the way that we choose to organize ourselves and allocate our resources. So I think I will read Adam Smith, Hayek, Friedman, Keynes, Marx, and Hegel. And anyone else, if you have to suggest, please do. Because even if it turns out that something is wrong, a view is wrong, an idea is wrong, at least I would like to understand why. Because I think that is just as, or maybe even more, important. You know, it's funny. Ever since I got the courage to basically start sharing more of my cinematic storytelling pieces of work on here, I've gotten comments that have asked me to put together some type of resource to basically show or teach how I've created those pieces of work. So something like a resource on filmmaking or lighting or editing. And I've always thought, well, I don't know if I really want to be teaching those things because I don't really know them. I don't have any formal training in them. I don't know any of the technical vocabulary, really. I've never taken a filmmaking job. I'm kind of just making stuff up as I go based on what I learn along the way and try out. I'm afraid that if I created a resource, a film pro would come along and look at it and be like, hey, why are you using f2.8 in this shot here? Don't you see that extremely unnoticeable drop off in sharpness in the corner of your image there? Then I recently realized how dumb I am. You are literally asking me to teach you. It doesn't matter if I don't have any formal training. It doesn't matter if I've never done a filmmaking job in my life. It doesn't matter if I know all of the technical vocabulary. You just want to know the direct knowledge that I have because you've resonated with the work that I've created in some way. And even with the last finance course that I did, which I still think is a very good entry point for a very beginner person, I think it needs some updating with a lot more of my own experiences thrown into it. So, I don't know. I'm feeling particularly tired lately with this indirect form of knowledge, whether that's using it in my own work or consuming it in somebody else's. And maybe that's due in part to the fact that I've kind of felt like in this particular career path, it can be hard to continue to grow as a person, because if you're constantly putting out material about things that you know, you don't really have any time to step away and learn new things or to challenge those things that you think you know. This is why making several videos a week has never worked for me. I always find that I need time to actually step away and try and experience some more life experiences so that I come back with things that I actually think are interesting or valuable to talk about. I'm curious to know if you maybe feel the same type of way as it would apply to your life. I genuinely want to know your perspective because, like I said earlier, believe it or not, I do learn a lot from you all. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. I hope you are well. Take care.